Politics Tonight, everyone. Thank you so much for staying with us. Tonight to discuss the Nigerian military reaffirming its commitment to democratic rule. And I've been speaking with a security consultant and CEO of Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Dr. Adamu, thank you so much for staying with us. Now let's move on with this conversation. And I'm sure that I will not be taking you off the field when I ask, by asking for your perspective on how we can improve our electoral process. I'm sure you're aware that conversations are ongoing about constitutional review and amending our electoral act. In what areas do you think, or would you want to see improvements or amendments to our electoral act?
Okay, even though, like you rightly indicated, this is slightly off my field, I do support the risk management component within the electoral process. So ahead of every elections, a risk assessment is conducted, and this risks are identified. And then, of course, the interagency consultative committee on election security usually sits down and then comes up with measures to mitigate those risks. But beyond that, I think one of the things that we need to admit is the attitude of our politicians. This has been a recurring issue. For as long as this attitude is not one that agrees to play fairly and play by the book, then we'll continue to have the challenge. I don't think there is any act that can address that. What happened in the last election, in the 2023 election, is a clear example of that. A lot of resources were committed. INEC, did its best in terms of the protocols and several other things that were introduced. Well, of course, we saw what IRF did, and then up till date, we've not been told what led to that, in spite of the fact that INEC has released its report of the election, but the clarity that would have allowed us to say, okay, this is what happened. And I think, like I spoke earlier on, the other issue is the role of the National Assembly in all of this. In spite of the fact that the turnover in the National Assembly continues to be very high, if I'm right, about 75% in the Senate, and then slightly lower than that in the House of Rep, in terms of the number of persons that were able to return. So they have been victims, as it were, but we've not seen enough, energy from them saying, okay, let's do an independent investigation to see what really happened in the 2023 elections. Yes, they are going to be, they've promised a review, but then how will that review be based on facts if an independent assessment is not conducted? If you are basing your review just on whims and caprices, as it were, then I think sadly we won't achieve what we have. So if you ask me, to sit here and say this is what changes are required, beyond what has already been done, I do not think that that's the right approach. But perhaps picking elements of some of what we know went wrong, and I've given you the example of the use of electronic means to enhance the integrity of the process, including IRF, which ordinarily should have gone well, but it didn't go well. So we need to look closely at that. I've talked about the attitude of politicians, this desire to circumvent the process. And then lastly, I think would be the role of the judiciary. The processes are there. We, at the moment, and as a country, we are not even discussing it, what is happening in Plateau State, where clearly two levels of elections have produced, from the point of view of the judiciary, has produced different judgments that are, for all intents and purposes, contradictory. It cannot help the growth of our democracy. So these are areas that I think we need to look closely at and then come up with better ways to handle them and or to approach them.
Right, but now that we've tried all non-governance structures, parliamentary, diarchy under IBB, military and presidential, yes, it's still bumpy, but many would say we're not where we used to be. For the senators who say, of all of these options, the parliamentary system of government will serve us better. Where do you stand? It's dicey. The parliamentary system is cheaper, and I'm all for a leaner government. I'm currently very unhappy with the big government. The leaner it is, the better for us. But however, I'm a realist.
And I know that it will be almost impossible to achieve what the senators want to achieve at the moment. The presidential system is embedded. The beneficiaries of that system are the ones who will, support this change. And we know that they're not going to support it just folding their hands because, unfortunately, they will be the one that will affect. So on the one hand, I'm supportive of a leaner government and anything to do to achieve that. But I do not think that what is being envisaged by the senators in terms of returning to a parliamentary system of government is realistic, at least in the manner that they are approaching it. As a risk management specialist, what I have done is to ask myself what is happening, and it's very clear that these are pressure points that are being touched, and we're likely to see the emergence of a divided parliament, as it were, some supportive and then others not supportive. And so we're going to see an extended period of debate between the two sides. And perhaps maybe at the moment it would help provide the kind of checks and balances that we need in the parliament, which we're not seeing at the moment. But in terms of achieving this change, I don't think it would happen. If that is not the case, and I'm quite delighted with the statement by the Bola Tinubu administration that they are prepared to implement the Oronsonya report. I know there is a lot of argument around the timing and perhaps the fact that the report itself from 2012 to 2024, a long time has passed, and maybe there would have been a need to review it. But the elements of producing a leaner government, a leaner structure, and then, of course, the burden that at the moment is on the government are things that I'm supportive of. Anything that would achieve that, I think we should look towards it. So having said that, there are several components of this conversation that I think are being considered. One of them, for instance, is to prune down on certain elements of the government, including, for instance, the parliament. Some conversations have said, why don't we just have one chamber instead of the two that we have at the moment? Other discussants are also looking at the size of the executive arm itself, the number of ministers that are there at the moment, and then, of course, even the number of appointees, special advisors, and all of that. So all of these are conversations that I think as a country we need to have. But at the end of the day, what would be useful for us is to prune down on the size of the government. And of course, to enhance accountability. So number one, introduce elements of monitoring and evaluation. Number two, enhance the auditing function within the system itself, so that there will be all of the wastages and leakages that exist at the moment would be reduced. In the area of standards too, which is number three, I think it would really help us if we have standards across all the governance measures. Earlier on, I spoke about the performance measurement system that this administration has embraced. I think it would also be very good to strengthen that performance system. If we do all of these 4 things, I think it would help reduce the current weight on the budget from governance.
All right, Doctor. For a minute, let's talk about the administration of justice in Nigeria, the issues and challenges. And this is because earlier you talked about the role of the judiciary in improving our electoral process. When it comes to administrative of justice in Nigeria, what exactly are the issues and challenges for you?
So, I mean, the 3 key components of that is the law enforcement component, the judiciary, and then, of course, the custodial centers. Now, if you pick these 3, there is each of them is challenged. The law enforcement, as you very well know, unfortunately, is not doing that simple provision, which is law enforcement. The reason why we have the kind of challenges, security challenges we have at the moment is because law enforcement is not as active and strong as it should be. So if you pick one agency, institution of government in that component, law enforcement, the police, the challenges of the police are so multifaceted. I can spend the next 10 hours talking about them. But the good news is that there is a roadmap for police reform that was inherited by the President Bola Tinubu administration, that we're hoping to see further action in terms of the implementation of that roadmap. A lot of energy, effort was put into producing that roadmap. And this happened post the NSAS protest, when several government departments and then our development partners came together, and then a committee was set up, and then that roadmap has been produced, which is supposed to look at several elements of policing. Now, this is the challenge. A lot of offenses are being committed. those that are committing the offenses are not being arrested, and even where they're being arrested, they are not being prosecuted. And so the deterrence element within our law enforcement practice is almost completely eroded. I can, like I said, talk about this on several fronts. One of the first things that President Buhari told us he was going to do when he was inaugurated was to make sure that each of our law enforcement agencies have an evidence room. Unfortunately, 8 or 9 years after that promise, most of our security agencies do not, or law enforcement agencies don't have evidence room. So how do you hope to prosecute offenders when there are no evidence room? Every time on TV, including in your station, once an offense is committed, the scene where the offense is committed that is supposed to be barricaded so that evidence are protected, you see how that scenes are being violated on a daily basis till date. Even last week, I saw in one instance where a bomb was targeted a power infrastructure between Abuja and Kaduna, and the evidence was destroyed because people were allowed to touch it. So these are the kind of things that prevent our law enforcement agents from their ability. Now, that's just for law enforcement. If we move to the next one, which is the judiciary, some of the challenges that I've mentioned, of course, affect the judiciary. If evidence are not gathered and presented in a manner that would convince the judge of the guilt of the person that is being tried, then no matter how much the judge hates that person, he's not likely to convict him. The second component is the possibility of corruption within the judicial system. Of course, that has been well documented. And several other challenges. Some of our courts still use longhand to write their judicial reports and all of that, which is a huge challenge. So that is also affecting it. And then, of course, the third one is the custodial centers. And, of course, as you very well know, there are several challenges within the custodial centers. They are overcrowded, and I must commend the current Minister of Interior for some of the efforts he has made in terms of decongesting them. And then, of course, the capacity and capability of those correctional centers to actually carry out the purpose for which, the mandate for which they were set up. So if you put all of these three together, it's very easy for you to see why judicial system or the criminal justice system is not able to arrest and punish offenders.
Right.
I think as a country, we need to admit that. We need to look at perhaps the ways to look, as a whole on how we can improve the service of justice or the delivery of justice across these three components that I've discussed.
Right. But how important or crucial is a competent, independent, and impartial judiciary in preserving and upholding the rule of law in this country?
I don't think there's any arm of government that is as important as that in terms of the rule of law. They are the custodians, as it were, of the justice system. And if they are independent and impartial, then their ability to uphold and to ensure the rule of law, I think, would be crucial for us as a country. At the moment, sadly, there is enough evidence to show that that ability is impaired. And this, of course, is as a result of so many challenges, some of them institutional, and then others personal to the persons who are occupying that position as itself. So I think the issues around the independence of the judiciary, issues around, earlier on I talked about the equipment support they need, and then of course the infrastructure that is required to allow for speedy delivery of justice, I think would go a long way towards enhancing the rule of law within the country.
All right, thank you so much, Doctor. Now, before we leave tonight, let's talk about ECOWAS and this latest development. 7 months after, ECOWAS has finally lifted sanctions on Nigeria and others. What do you make of this? Would you say ECOWAS regretted its actions, and do you think lifting these sanctions will bring those countries back to the sub-regional body?
I wouldn't use the word regretted its action. Yes, it has retraced its steps, and for good reason. You don't issue a threat when you are not prepared to carry out that threat. Unfortunately, in terms of strategy, that was a huge gaffe. We issued the threat, and then we were unable to carry out the threat. In simple terms, we became a dog that couldn't bite. And it was very obvious that the recipient of that threat was able to see through our buff, and they understood that we could not bite, and they are victorious in terms of that. But there's nothing wrong with admitting at a point that you are wrong, and then of course retreating, and that's what we've done. But what worries me is what strategic, issues, how we are handling the retreat. What are we putting in place? Earlier on, I spoke about the strategic communication component that is almost lacking within how the government is currently approaching a lot of things. It also affected that. As someone who is monitoring those developments, I can tell you that there are foreign countries that are supporting, in particular, some of the coup, the juntas, including in Niger, and they are also active in Nigeria, where on social media platforms you see a lot of the circulation of information from bots, from others. And this circulation is so active to the point where it's also affecting Nigerians. And of course, it's also supporting what they are doing in those countries. Now, having said that, it's not too late. I think we should speedily, the communication unit in ECOWAS I must say, need to be strengthened. And one of the easiest ways to do that is for Nigeria to step in, like it's been doing, to support that communication component from a strategic communication point of view. In today's world, you cannot win a war if you do not understand the ability to influence both your citizens, win their hearts and mind, and then also the citizens of your enemy. And we're not doing enough of that. So yes, we've retreated our steps, but if we need to win the outcome, then we need to start influencing the various components that would help us win the outcome. The second issue is the need to use non-diplomatic platforms to reestablish discussions, contacts, so that the ground will be prepared and made easy for the diplomatic or the formal components of our diplomacy to come in and then to achieve the desired results. I haven't seen enough of that at the moment, certainly.
Right, but are you bothered that the parliamentary of sanctions might embolden other coup plotters in this West sub-region body?
So it all depends. If we leave it as it is at the moment, I cannot rule out that possibility. One of the, I would say, gaps or that mistakes that was committed is sadly the inability of ECOWAS as a sub-region to reach out to other sub-regions and ensure support. As a good example is countries in North Africa. They were able to continue supporting a country like Niger. Even US, which is a strategic partner to us, we've seen the role US played. It took time before it called development in Niger coup, and even after it called that development, it left its ambassador there. Its troops are still in Niger. So as long as we allow those type of windows that would continue to give some leeway for the Nigerian junta to exercise its freedom and capacity, then the ability of those sanctions to achieve their desired results would remain.
So in 30 seconds, Dr. Adamu, in 30 seconds, what do you think can be done to deepen good governance in Africa? In 30 seconds.
Well, in simple terms, is to enhance the M&E component, the performance measurement component that I talked about. That ability to ensure that when you vote money or you devote money to a certain component, that money is used for its purpose. One simple way is to strengthen M&E, monitor and evaluation, strengthen auditing functions, and then, of course, at the end of the day, have a performance review system that is able to give you the desired results at the end of the day. If we do that, and I think some level of good governance will be enhanced.
Right. I must say a very big thank you to you, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. He's a security consultant and CEO, Beacon Security and Intelligence Limited. Thank you so much for your perspective tonight. Thank you. Thank you for all.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you very much for watching. The Marks